Good evening. For the little bit of time that I have tonight, I would like to talk about one of what I think is one of the most important amendments from the Bill of Rights, and one that has largely been under intense scrutiny in the last few years, and that is the Second Amendment. Now, when you look at the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment is one of the most simply constructed of the amendments. It simply states that a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the rights of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, according to the article that we had in our reading from Robert Shalhoub, this was one of the most key amendments and rights that the founders wanted to protect. After all, one of the ambitions that England had when they sent troops over to the Americas during the Revolutionary War was to disarm the colonists and thus quench the rebellion. Now, the founders understood that threat, and as they began to process of founding a government for the new country, they wanted to make sure that the people had a means to protect themselves, and as well have a means to protect themselves from government tyranny as well. And another reason is just also could be the threat of Indian uprisings, attacks as the frontier as they continued to spread west. I think it was another reason why the founders want to make sure and even encourage that there be a gun in every home. And throughout history, it has largely been the same as most people throughout history. And America is one of the highest populations of owning guns. Now, this amendment was largely left alone, I think, again, according to Robert Shalhoub, that largely due to its simplicity and many being in favor, it was largely left alone and in obscurity until the 20th century. But since the beginning of the 20th century, this Second Amendment has actually often come into intense scrutiny and under review a lot. One of the biggest court cases involving the Second Amendment came in 1939 in the United States versus Miller, where a judge who was in favor of a gun control act that had just been passed after the St. Valentine's Day massacre ruled that weapons that do not have anything to do with a well-regulated militia were not protected by the Second Amendment. Now, more recently, especially with some of the rises in the 1990s and the 2000s with school shootings, and recently with just the Las Vegas shooting, it's become even more intense in its scrutiny to either have stricter gun control laws or take away weapons except for government use alone, if you look on the extreme side of the liberal agenda. And one case that involved this was the District of Columbia versus Heller in 2008, which is one of the more better known of the Supreme Court Second Amendment case. In this, Supreme Court handed down a landmark decision in that the people or an individual had the right, and it was protected by the Second Amendment, to possess a firearm. And that is still under much debate today, but that case has carried throughout the years since 2008. And I believe that when you look at the Second Amendment, it is one that's going to continue to be under intense scrutiny with the rise and with the shootings that we have had, as the conservatives are going to look at it and say that, that's the reason we need weapons in order to protect ourselves, or they're going to look at the heroic actions of those who behave bravely during those times. The more on the liberal side of the agenda are going to look at it, and they're going to say that that is why we need stricter gun control and to take away the guns so these things don't happen. And I think the bottom line is that we see both from the evidence and from Scripture as a Christian that whether we take away guns or not, these bad things are still going to happen, because man still has a sin nature. Man has the capacity to sin, and unless we're going to do something about that as Christians to reach souls for Christ, those will still continue to happen regardless of what we do to the Second Amendment. And I believe the Second Amendment is a key foundation of the Bill of Rights that should stand and has stood for the right for individuals and for the security of a free state to possess firearms.